You ready for a Lightroom tutorial? We got back from our bear excursion a couple weeks ago. Didn't see any bears. It was quite a disappointment. Last week I had trouble with my computer all week getting my lips to sync up. You ready for a Lightroom tutorial? Let's see if my lips sync up. Because if they don't, I'm going to light this room on fire. Hopefully we've got all that sorted out. Got a couple critters here from the trip and a landscape. We're going to take these images, make them pop. Hope you guys enjoy the edit. Let's dive right into it. So we have this deer here making a real funny face. Kind of like it. First thing I'm going to do is hop over in the masking. And you could use the select subject mask. Lately I'm finding that the select object mask works better. Even though I wouldn't call a deer an object, I'm just finding it does a little bit better of a selection. So just going to choose that mask mode, paint them in here. And we'll let the computer do its thing. It did a pretty good job, but we have a little bit of a bleed over there. We'll come up, select subtract, come over here, click on your mask to expand it. If it's not, subtract, brush, make sure auto mask is selected, and we'll just clean this up some. That ought to work pretty good for tutorial purposes. You could do a little bit more of a fine job. Right click mask, duplicate and invert. Same problem, little bleed through on the ear, subtract, brush, and we will clean that up. Now we have a selection of our deer and a selection of our background. Let's go ahead and start with the background. I'm going to drop the exposure just a tiny amount. Lift the contrast, lift the highlights, lift the shadows a bit, lift the whites a small amount, drop the blacks. And then I'm going to come down and drop the texture to kind of help that bokeh out some, that blurriness. Drop the clarity and give it a little bit of punchiness by adding a small amount of dehaze. And we'll select our other mask, which is the deer. And I just want to make him pop some. I'm going to lift the exposure, not too much, or he starts to look cut out, look fake. Let's lift the shadows in him. Lift the whites. I'm going to go ahead and leave the blacks alone. Now I want to warm them up. Just a small amount there, about 16. Come down. Lift the texture. His fur pop just a little more. Lift the clarity. That's looking pretty good, but he's a little too punchy. I'm going to come up here and drop the contrast on him. And there, that looks a lot more natural. We'll go ahead and close out our masking. And I want to come down here to the hue, saturation, luminance slider. We're going to start with hue. I want to take this green and push it towards blue. I'm going to go pretty heavy. It doesn't look that good right now, but if we come over to saturation, drop the saturation in the greens. Now we have a nice contrasty blue-green against the orange of the deer. And come and select healing. We're on content aware and bring out a little bit of this foliage. That did a pretty good job. Let's go ahead and clean the rest of it up. Here it didn't do too good, so I'm going to click on that one, delete it, make the brush a little bigger with my mouse wheel, and let's just try again. There we go, that time it worked. Come up here to masking once more, create a new mask, radial gradient, nice and big. I'm going to decrease the feather. and just kind of have this center area placed over the deer's face. I'm going to invert and drop our exposure down just to give a nice custom vignette there. And I think that is good. Made a big improvement on this photograph. Here's the before, here's the after. Nice and easy edit, few sliders, few HSL adjustments, and some masking. Let's hop on over now to our next image. This is a landscape taken at Farley Overlook on Highway 12, the Highway of Legends, just outside of Trinidad. It's a little flat, but we're going to make it pop. Let's turn on our highlight and shadow clipping by clicking these little triangles on your histogram. Come over to our basic sliders. Actually, let's come over to our masking. Select sky. Did a very good job of selecting the sky there. Right click, duplicate and invert. Now we have a mask of our sky and a mask of our foreground. Let's go ahead and work on the sky first. We just want to make it a little more dramatic. Could take the highlights, drop them all the way down, make it real dramatic. But I've been in a less is more type photo editing lately. And we're just going to take our shadows and blacks down a small amount. Lift our whites, just a little clipping's okay. And from there, we'll come down and bring in some texture, not too much, but you could go heavy and get a nice dramatic sky. And our clarity, a tiny amount. And to me, that looks a lot better. We'll go to our other mask now and work on the foreground. I'm going to use an S curve to add a little contrast. Lift our highlights, drop our shadows. Then on basic sliders, I'm going to lift the exposure some, drop the blacks a little, lift the highlights, and I think lift the shadows a little as well. And we're going to do a little dodging and birding, create a new mask, radial gradient. We'll dodge this area here by putting in a radial gradient. Let's bring our feather to 100 so it's nice and smooth and natural, and lift our exposure. It's kind of playing with the lighting a little bit. Can add another radial gradient. And I want to do the same thing on this interesting bush here. One more radial gradient, and this time we're going to do some burning by darkening down this shadow area a small amount. And I just think that adds a little pop to the image. Let's create a linear gradient from the bottom. Drop the exposure down a small amount just so it draws your eye up into the photograph. For now, we're going to close out our masking. Come down here to the hue, saturation, luminance. We're going to work on luminance. Lift the yellow flowers a small amount, as well as the purple magenta flowers. Back to masking. Radial gradient. Kind of long on the horizontal axis. I'm going to leave the feather at 100. I really like the fence and this rock wall back here. So that's inside the mask. I'm going to invert it and do a little custom vignette again by dropping the exposure a small amount. And there we go. Here's our landscape image. Here's our before. Here's our after. Another quick, easy, simple edit. And we got one more picture to go. This is my favorite picture from the trip. Almost makes not seeing a bear worth it, but seeing this mama cow with her baby calf was pretty awesome. Image is in the shadow. It's a little flat, a little dark, but we're gonna make it pop. So we're going to do the same as with the first deer image. Select object and masking. We're gonna paint in Mama. Let the computer do its thing. Click Add, Object, paint in Baby. But now you can see we selected a bunch of this grass in there. So now we're going to subtract color range and just select some of that color. And there we go. It took the grass out of the selection. You can refine it up here, but I think that looks pretty good. Now we will right click, duplicate and invert mask, and we have our two selections. It did select a little bit of the elk there. Let's do subtract color range, and that took that right out. So we have two good selections to work with. Let's get to it. I want to take the exposure up a small amount in the background. I want to take the contrast up. And I think that looks pretty good, except for we'll take the texture down just so it's a little softer and you're a little more focused on the elk. Now we'll select our elk. And we want to brighten them up some. Let's start by lifting the shadows and the whites and just a tiny bit on overall exposure. We don't want them to look cut out and fake. Lift their texture, a little bit on clarity, and warm them up a small amount as well. Looking at this, I think I want to go with a little bit of a different crop. I'm thinking a 4x3. Let's shrink it down so we're zooming in on our critters. And I want to get the dominant eye close to a 1/3 line. And play with it here for a minute. Something about like that looks pretty good. Okay, a little more masking. I'm going to create a linear gradient. We can see this is the light side of the animal. This is the shadow. And we're just going to help emphasize that a little more. Linear gradient from the sun side. Lift the exposure some. Add a linear gradient from the shadow side. Drop the exposure some. Linear gradient from the bottom just because it's too bright. It's drawing your eye in. We want our eye to go to the critter. Drop the exposure some there as well. And that kind of helped frame them in nicely. From here, I'm going to close masking for now. And I'm going to do the same thing as with the deer. I'm going to push some blue into that green just because I think it looks really good against the color of the elk. But I do want to drop the saturation of the green quite a bit. And I think that layer looks pretty sharp. Lift the saturation in the orange some. Reopen masking. Create a new mask, radial gradient. Nice and big over the elk. Invert and drop the exposure. All in all, that looks pretty good, but I think we can blend it together a little better with our basic sliders. Let's lift the shadows some. Lift the highlights. Lift the whites. Drop the blacks. Take a little bit of contrast out of it. And to me there, that looks more natural. That was our final edit. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Until next time, Touchstone Pixels signing off.